World War II created thousands of war movies. Most became loud patriotic fantasies designed to comfort audiences, but a small group of British films terrified even hardened veterans because they felt too real. These were not stories about invincible heroes. They exposed exhaustion, fear, obsession, and emotional collapse with brutal honesty. According to film historians, these were the British WWII movies that matched the cold, realistic perfection Stanley Kubrick respected most. Number 11. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, 1943. War movies today often worship explosions. This film did something far more dangerous. It showed how war slowly destroys the soul of a decent man. That quiet honesty stunned generations of filmmakers, including Stanley Kubrick, who admired cinema that refused to romanticize conflict. The story follows British officer Clive Candy across decades of service from the Boer War into World War II. Instead of turning him into a flawless hero, the film exposes his aging pride, his fading ideals, and his inability to understand modern brutality. British audiences during wartime were shocked because the movie dared to question old-fashioned patriotism while the war was still raging. Winston Churchill reportedly hated it. That controversy only made the film more legendary. Directors later described it as one of the most emotionally truthful portraits of military life ever created. Every conversation feels painfully human. Every victory carries sadness. Even the friendships inside the film feel temporary because war changes everyone beyond recognition. Kubrick respected films that treated soldiers like complicated people rather than propaganda symbols. Colonel Blimp fits that philosophy perfectly. The film does not scream about heroism. It quietly dissects it. The realism comes from emotion rather than bloodshed. That is why many historians believe Kubrick viewed it as one of the most authentic British war films ever made. Number 10. The Cruel Sea, 1953. No glamorous speeches appear in this movie. No fearless supermen charge into battle. The Cruel Sea traps viewers inside the exhausting nightmare of naval warfare, where survival depended on luck, discipline, and emotional endurance. The story follows the crew of a British corvette escorting convoys through the Atlantic, while German U-boats stalk them beneath freezing waves. What makes the film unforgettable is its refusal to offer comfort. The officers look exhausted. Sailors panic during attacks. Men drown screaming in black water while commanders must keep moving because stopping could doom the entire ship. Those moments horrified audiences during the 1950s because they felt disturbingly real. Veterans praised the film for capturing the unbearable tension of convoy duty more accurately than almost any war picture before it. Kubrick admired precision in filmmaking, and this movie operates with brutal precision. The naval procedures, the cramped interiors, the endless waiting, and the emotional collapse of exhausted men all feel documentary-level authentic. Even the combat scenes avoid Hollywood fantasy. Torpedoes arrive suddenly without triumphant music or heroic poses. Death feels random, cold, and humiliating. Many critics later argued that this film influenced the psychological realism found in later anti-war cinema. That connection explains why Kubrick reportedly respected it so deeply. The movie understood something terrifying about war. Sometimes courage means simply surviving another day without losing your mind. Number 9. Went the Day Well? 1942. British cinema rarely looked this vicious during the early years of World War II. Went the Day Well begins like a peaceful village drama filled with smiling civilians, quiet roads, and ordinary routines. Then the nightmare arrives. German soldiers disguised as British troops secretly occupy the town and begin murdering anyone who resists. Audiences in 1942 were shaken because the violence felt frighteningly possible. The invasion paranoia felt real enough to trigger national anxiety. Unlike polished propaganda films, this story refuses to protect innocent characters. Elderly villagers die brutally. Civilians panic and betray one another. Children become trapped in terrifying situations. One sequence involving a woman killing an enemy soldier with an axe became infamous for its shocking intensity. Viewers were not expecting that level of brutality from British wartime cinema. Even today, the violence still feels strangely modern. Kubrick admired films that exposed human behavior under pressure. This movie strips away patriotic fantasy and reveals fear, confusion, and desperation. Nobody becomes a larger-than-life action hero. Survival depends on ordinary people making impossible decisions in seconds. That realism gives the film enormous power decades later. Historians now describe it as one of the earliest British war thrillers to present occupation horror with near-documentary seriousness. The atmosphere feels cold and believable because the danger never stops. Kubrick valued emotional truth above spectacle, and this film delivered exactly that through its terrifying simplicity. Number 8. The Dam Busters, 1955. Few British war films achieved the technical precision of The Dam Busters. The movie recreates Operation Chastise, where Royal Air Force pilots flew dangerously low bombing missions against German dams using revolutionary bouncing bombs. Lesser filmmakers would have turned the story into patriotic fantasy. This film approached the mission like a military procedure where one small mistake meant instant death. The realism begins with obsessive preparation. Pilots study calculations for altitude, speed, and timing with terrifying intensity. Training sequences feel almost scientific. When the attacks finally begin, the tension becomes unbearable because the movie forces viewers to understand exactly how fragile the mission truly was. Aircraft skim across black water, while anti-aircraft fire tears through the night sky. Men die suddenly without dramatic speeches or emotional music. Kubrick respected technical perfection, and this film earned enormous praise for its operational accuracy. Aviation historians still admire the flight sequences because they captured genuine flying danger long before modern digital effects existed. The physical realism remains astonishing even today. Every cockpit vibration, every radio command, and every desperate maneuver feels authentic. The movie also influenced future filmmakers far beyond Britain. Many cinema historians later connected its low-altitude attack structure to famous battle sequences in later science fiction films. That legacy helped keep the movie alive across generations. Kubrick reportedly admired works that combined engineering precision with human tension, and The Dam Busters achieved both with frightening effectiveness. Number 7. Battle of Britain, 1969. Modern war films often hide behind digital effects and chaotic editing. Battle of Britain did the opposite. The production placed real aircraft into the sky and recreated aerial warfare with terrifying authenticity. That decision transformed the movie into one of the most realistic depictions of air combat ever filmed. Viewers were not watching actors pretending to fly. They were watching actual machines tearing through real clouds at deadly speeds. The film focuses on the desperate Royal Air Force defense against Nazi Germany during 1940. Instead of glorifying combat, the movie emphasizes exhaustion, confusion, and constant pressure. Pilots barely sleep. Commanders struggle to track enemy movements. Every mission feels like another step toward collapse. The realism becomes overwhelming because the film treats war like a machine that slowly grinds men into dust. Kubrick admired technical mastery and military detail more than sentimental hero worship. Battle of Britain fits perfectly beside his own obsession with precision. Historians still praise the film for using genuine Spitfires, Hurricanes, and bombers rather than cheap substitutes. Even the radio chatter and combat formations were reconstructed with remarkable care. The movie also avoids melodrama. Death arrives quickly and often without warning. Some pilots vanish into smoke before audiences even learn their names. That cold honesty gives the film enormous power. Kubrick reportedly respected movies that confronted war without illusion, and Battle of Britain remains one of the clearest examples ever made. Number 6. Ice Cold in Alex, 1958. No giant battle dominates Ice Cold in Alex. No massive explosions shake the screen. Yet the movie feels more emotionally exhausting than many large-scale war epics. The story follows a British ambulance crew attempting to cross the North African desert while surrounded by danger, dehydration, and psychological collapse. Their mission sounds simple until the desert itself becomes the enemy. What makes the film extraordinary is its suffocating realism. Sweat pours from exhausted faces. Vehicles break down beneath brutal heat. Water becomes more valuable than bullets. Every mile feels like torture. Audiences in the 1950s connected deeply with its gritty survival atmosphere because it captured the physical misery soldiers rarely discussed openly after the war. Kubrick respected stories where pressure slowly destroys emotional stability. Ice Cold in Alex operates almost like a psychological experiment. The characters grow paranoid, bitter, and emotionally numb as exhaustion takes control. Even moments of friendship feel fragile because survival changes human behavior. The performances avoid theatrical heroics and instead feel painfully natural. The famous final scene became legendary because it represented something war films rarely explored: relief, pure exhausted relief after surviving hell. Critics later called the movie one of Britain's greatest survival dramas because it focused on endurance rather than victory. Kubrick admired realism that came from human suffering rather than spectacle. Ice Cold in Alex achieved that with terrifying honesty. Number 5. The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957. At first glance, The Bridge on the River Kwai looks like a traditional British war epic filled with discipline, courage, and military pride. Then the story slowly turns into something far darker. The film follows British prisoners of war forced by the Japanese army to build a railway bridge in Burma. What shocked audiences was not the violence. It was the terrifying psychological obsession growing inside the British commander himself. Colonel Nicholson treats the bridge project almost like a sacred duty. Instead of resisting the enemy, he becomes consumed by perfection, discipline, and reputation. That moral collapse fascinated filmmakers for decades, including Stanley Kubrick, who admired stories exposing madness hidden beneath authority. The film transforms military professionalism into something deeply unsettling. The realism comes from emotional contradiction rather than battlefield spectacle. Prisoners collapse from exhaustion beneath brutal heat. Officers argue over honor while men suffer around them. Nobody feels entirely heroic. Nobody feels entirely evil. That complexity made the movie revolutionary for its time because many war films still relied on simple patriotism and clean moral divisions. Critics later described the film as one of the greatest studies of military obsession ever made. Kubrick himself explored similar themes years later through rigid commanders and psychological breakdowns in his own cinema. The connection feels impossible to ignore. Even today, the bridge itself feels symbolic. Human beings building monuments to pride while surrounded by destruction. That haunting truth is exactly the kind of realism Kubrick respected most. Number 4, In Which We Serve, 1942. During World War II, many propaganda films tried to inspire audiences with easy patriotism and cheerful heroics. In Which We Serve chose a more painful path. The story follows British sailors struggling to survive after their destroyer is attacked and destroyed at sea. Instead of focusing only on combat, the movie constantly returns to memories of home, family, sacrifice, and fear. That emotional realism separated it from countless wartime productions. The film was partly inspired by real naval experiences, and audiences immediately recognized its authenticity. Sailors did not speak like movie stars. Officers looked exhausted rather than glamorous. Men joked nervously because fear never disappeared. Those details gave the film unusual emotional power during a time when Britain desperately needed morale. Kubrick admired films that grounded war in human behavior rather than patriotic slogans. In Which We Serve understood that military life involves loneliness, confusion, and emotional damage, long before modern anti-war cinema embraced those themes. Even quiet scenes carry tension because viewers know death could arrive without warning. The sinking sequences also stunned audiences during the 1940s. Water crashes through steel corridors while trapped sailors fight panic beneath smoke and darkness. The danger feels immediate because the film avoids exaggerated melodrama. Historians later praised the movie as one of Britain's most honest wartime portraits. Kubrick reportedly valued works that respected intelligence and emotional truth. This film delivered both with remarkable restraint. Number 3. Sink the Bismarck, 1960. Hollywood often turns naval warfare into noisy spectacle filled with endless explosions and triumphant speeches. Sink the Bismarck feels almost frighteningly restrained by comparison. The film follows the British Royal Navy pursuit of the German battleship Bismarck after the destruction of HMS Hood. Instead of glorifying battle, the movie focuses on calculation exhaustion and strategic pressure inside command rooms where every mistake could cost thousands of lives. That realism impressed military historians for decades. Officers spend most of the story studying maps, analyzing radio reports, and making impossible decisions with incomplete information. The tension comes from uncertainty rather than action. Kubrick admired stories built around procedure discipline and psychological stress, which explains why this film fits so naturally beside his own worldview. Even the combat scenes avoid fantasy. Ships fire across massive distances while commanders watch helplessly from dark control rooms. Death arrives impersonally through steel smoke and mathematics. The movie understands that modern warfare often feels cold and mechanical. That disturbing honesty separates it from more romantic war epics of the era. Audiences also respected the film because it treated both British and German sailors with seriousness rather than cartoon villainy. Nobody celebrates destruction. Everyone simply struggles to survive duty and pressure. Kubrick reportedly valued films that confronted military systems without sentimental illusion. Sink the Bismarck achieves exactly that through its quiet realism, disciplined storytelling, and relentless atmosphere of fatal inevitability. Number 2. The Way Ahead, 1944. Before many war movies celebrated unstoppable heroes, The Way Ahead showed something far more believable. Ordinary civilians transformed into soldiers through exhaustion, humiliation, training, and fear. That grounded approach gave the film extraordinary authenticity during wartime Britain because audiences recognized themselves inside these characters. The story follows a mixed group of recruits entering military service with different personalities, backgrounds, and weaknesses. Some are frightened, some are arrogant, others simply want to survive. Instead of rushing toward combat glory, the film spends enormous time showing repetitive drills, arguments, discipline, and emotional pressure. Kubrick admired realism built from process, and this movie practically operates like a study of psychological conditioning. What makes the film powerful is its refusal to turn soldiers into fantasy icons. Men fail training exercises, officers lose patience, fear spreads quietly before combat missions. Even moments of courage feel awkward and human rather than cinematic. That emotional honesty influenced later generations of military films, attempting to capture the exhausting transformation from civilian life into wartime mentality. The final battle scenes also avoid theatrical heroics. Gunfire feels chaotic and terrifying because the audience already understands these men personally. Every casualty carries emotional weight. Historians later praised the movie as one of Britain's most realistic portraits of military preparation during World War II. Kubrick respected works that stripped war down to human behavior, and The Way Ahead achieved that with remarkable simplicity. Number 1. A Canterbury Tale, 1944. This may be the strangest film on the entire list because A Canterbury Tale barely resembles a traditional war movie at all. There are no giant battlefield sequences, no heroic invasions, no endless combat scenes. Yet many historians believe its emotional realism captured wartime Britain more honestly than almost any military epic ever made. That quiet authenticity is exactly why the film aligns so strongly with Kubrick's artistic philosophy. The story follows civilians and soldiers crossing the English countryside during World War II, while strange events unfold inside a rural village. The war exists mostly in atmosphere rather than direct violence. Blackout conditions, empty roads, lonely railway stations, and uncertain futures create a haunting emotional landscape. Audiences during the 1940s recognized the feeling immediately because it reflected everyday wartime anxiety more accurately than patriotic propaganda ever could. Kubrick admired films that explored psychology, isolation, and hidden tension beneath ordinary life. A Canterbury Tale achieves that through mood rather than spectacle. Conversations feel natural. Silence carries emotional weight. Even peaceful countryside scenes contain quiet sadness because war hangs invisibly over everything. Critics later called the film one of British cinema's greatest masterpieces because it preserved the emotional memory of wartime existence instead of merely recreating combat. That subtle realism influenced generations of filmmakers seeking deeper truths about conflict. Kubrick reportedly valued cinema that trusted intelligence atmosphere and emotional complexity. Few British World War II films embodied those qualities more beautifully than A Canterbury Tale. These films survived for decades because they refused to lie about war. Stanley Kubrick admired cinema that exposed uncomfortable truth, and these British masterpieces did exactly that. No empty patriotism, no fantasy heroics, just fear, sacrifice, obsession, and survival. That brutal honesty still makes them feel more powerful than countless modern war movies today.